expands faster, then that means its value goes down. For example, I like to use the soup pot analogy. Imagine we get this big pot of soup here, and that's the money supply. And the money supply is really determined by the number of, let's call it bean soup. So the number of beans in that pot of soup. Let's say there's 1 million beans in that pot of soup. So that's the value of that money supply. Now, a politician comes along and says, well, we don't have enough money. This economy needs more money. So they decide to get a hose, and they start pouring water into the pot. They double the quantity of the liquid in the pot. So look, we just doubled the water supply. I mean, doubled the money supply. Our bean soup, now we've got twice as much bean soup. Well, it's true, they do have twice as much bean soup, but they still got the same number of beans. So the nourishment value of the soup, the real value of the soup hasn't changed, just the quantity of the volume of it. And so if people want to stay alive on this bean soup, they have to eat twice as many bowls of it as they did before. So they don't gain anything at all.
That's a great analogy.
And so what they're really doing is just expanding the money supply by increasing the volume of the water, but not the beans.
So, Edward, what do you propose to catalyze more trade? If we don't have the available credit, which is really fiat credit, it's not really credit, it's, what did you say?
Well, it's counterfeit.
It's counterfeit. How do we expand trade? Right now, a lot of people can't even get loans for their cars, even though the cars function as a form of collateral. And a lot of people can't get trade lines. A lot of the banks are not allowing credit to be issued. Won't that impact commerce for the worse on one hand, but it will prevent the exploitation of this counterfeiting on the other?
Well, I think what you said is true, but hidden behind that issue is the larger issue, which is, are we in charge of that? Are we supposed to manipulate the market or set the parameters up so that this works better than that? Are we so wise? Are we so powerful? Are we to be trusted with such power? I say no. First of all, I don't think anybody is smart enough to figure out all of those pros and cons and those conflicting pressures. What we should do is just step back and let the free market take over. And you say, well, people can't get a loan on their cars today. The answer is, well, in a free market, why can't they get a loan on their car? And that's because, well, the interest rates are automatically suppressed too low, so the lenders don't want to lend it because they can't make enough money on it. And why is the interest rate so low? Well, it's because the Federal Reserve System, in partnership with the government, has decreed that the interest rates be low right now in order to bolster the economy. Well, instead of having just the opposite effect, you see. So in other words, they made a mistake. These wise men are always figuring things out and doing it wrong. So get the government out of it. Let the interest rates go up. Oh, well, the interest rates went up. That means fewer people will want loans. Okay, fewer people should want loans. Well, maybe they can't pay that much for the car. They won't sell as many cars. Okay, let the free market determine maybe they need to produce fewer cars, or maybe they need to lower their profit margins, or maybe they need to start paying lower wages to their employees. Well, the employees won't like that because the wages now are fixed by law, and they can't live on that little money. Well, of course, so therefore they don't have jobs and so forth. You see, it's just a never-ending thing. The more you try and regulate the economy or the money system, one decision leads to two more that you have to make in order to cover the problems with the first decision. And you'll never figure it out, and it'll always wind up like it's winding up today, which is in total chaos. And so I say that the answer to all of these things is to let the free market take over. And now there will be some major adjustments, probably a lot of chaos, a lot of suffering, gnashing of teeth. But it will recover, and when it does, it'll be a beautiful system that'll work flawlessly, or close to it. But if we don't do that, there'll be a lot of suffering and gnashing of teeth also, as there is now, and the system will just continue to dip until the point we have no system at all. We'll be living basically in a totalitarian regime, a command economy, where the only way you can buy or make or sell anything is with government permission.
It's getting closer and closer in terms of the mechanisms for impacting a scenario that could look like that.
Yeah, that's where we're headed. And we have to go one of two directions. You can't sit in the middle. We're either going to totalitarianism or we're going to the free market.
Do you want to talk about the Mondrake mechanism, or is it too complicated?
Well, it's not complicated. It's simple enough. In fact, we kind of did touch on it before, but the Mondrake mechanism is the phrase I give to the method by which the money comes into existence in most of the world today, certainly in the United States.
But the essence of it is through debt.
The essence of it is through debt, yes. Or even deeper than that, it's through counterfeit. That's I still think that's the better word. But technically, it is through debt, and it's the debt process by which they can counterfeit. But anyway, here's how it works. I mentioned before, Kim, that the Federal Reserve System is really it's not a private organization. It's not a government agency. It's a hybrid group. It's a cartel in partnership with the federal government. But there are these two elements. It's a partnership, government and banks. And so they each have to benefit somewhat, or they wouldn't be in this partnership. So let's see how the government benefits first, and then we'll look and see how the banks benefit from this. The government benefits because under this system they can get any amount of money they want at any time without having to go to the taxpayers directly, without having to raise the obvious taxes. As I mentioned before, the result of this is inflation, which is an indirect tax, but people don't see that. They don't realize that inflation is a tax, or they don't realize who's doing it to them, so they just suffer it through. Whereas if they got a tax bill in the mail, there'd be a revolution. So that's why governments do not like to raise taxes, but they like the Mondrake mechanism. So here's how that works. Let's say the government is spending another $1 billion today that it doesn't have. Well, how does it get it? It tries to borrow it from investors. You and me will buy bonds or notes or bills and so forth, treasury bonds, or they'll sell these bonds to other governments or to central banks or to investment companies, retirement plans and that kind of thing. And that's how most of the money that the government borrows traditionally has come from. But now, especially now, that source is drying up. Nobody wants to lend anymore to the federal government because they're really beginning to wonder if they'll ever get paid back in anything that's worth anything, because the dollar is losing its value so quickly. Why would you lend $1,000 now to the federal government expecting to get back $1,020 in a year when you do get it back, it'll only be worth $322, you see. So that's why people are increasingly resisting the idea of lending money to the government. So what does the government do? They go down the street to the Federal Reserve building. They walk in. Let's say the Treasury official walks in, and the Federal Reserve officer says, "Good day, sir. What can we do for you?" And the Treasury official says, "Well, we'd like to borrow another trillion or $1 billion today." The Federal Reserve says, "No problem." He opens up the big checkbook. Of course, it's all done on computers, but let's just imagine he's got this big checkbook. He says, "Here's your check to the United States government for $1 billion," and he signs it. "Thank you very much." And they call it a loan. And the government takes it and deposits it into its checking account, and now it's got another $1 billion to keep going. The question is, where did that $1 billion come from? Where did the Federal Reserve System get it? Did they have any deposits? No. Did they have it anywhere? No. What they did is they simply created it out of thin air when they wrote that check. And then they pretended to loan it to the government, when actually all they did was they created it and gave it to the government, and the government agreed to pay them interest on it.
So it's counterfeit that becomes a debt that they get to write off on their books.
Yeah, that's right. The government
says, liability.
Yeah, the government says we'll pay it back to you. So that makes it an IOU, and that makes it a debt, and the bank can put it on its books as an asset. If the bank loans money,
so it's put on as an asset, not a liability.
Well, no, the government has the liability.
Right.
Well, actually, when you put any transaction into your books, you have to go on both sides of the ledger, a debit and a credit. So yes, they balance each other. the this